Almost exactly 3 years ago, we were just approaching the release of that game. It was a dark time. I made my video talking specifically about Victoria 3's war system, which became my most viewed one ever. I hope another one dethrones it. But now we're coming up to the release of Europa Universalis V, and I'm here to make a video on a much more positive note. Much has changed in these 3 years.
Absolutely not.
What I didn't know at the time back then, going through all the Victoria 3 controversies, was that people were watching and taking note of the fact that Victoria 2 was crying out for a proper successor and didn't get one. One of those people, it turns out, was Johan Andersson. I never would have guessed he'd make the next Europa Universalis game, the spiritual successor to Victoria 2, but here we are. I'm not one of the lucky few content creators who has early access to Europa Universalis V. I'll be playing it for the first time, just like many of you, on release date, without pre-ordering it. So this video will be based on the publicly available information, and not too detailed on mechanics, which we'll find out about when I stream the game on release day. For example, it's really difficult to get an understanding of how the economy is going to work without playing it. But also something I've done in my past discussion videos mainly about Victoria 3, which I like to think I can give you good insights on, is the game in general, what it represents, what it means to Paradox Interactive as a company. You'll see why I don't have early access when we get to that section. And thoughts from my niche perspective of being mainly a Victoria 2 multiplayer player. For content creators playing and discussing EU5 making comparisons to other games, there's a glaring gap if they haven't played Victoria 2. If you're new to this channel and you want to see a glimpse of what Europa Universalis V multiplayer could be like, check out some of my videos, watch a series like the Gran Colombia series. Later in this video I'm going to talk about how EU5 plans to handle multiplayer and my thoughts on that. Enjoy the video and please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, I'll read them all. This is one of the first things they revealed about the game in early dev diaries, but it's still remarkable to think that EU5 is going to have a fully fledged simulated pop system, coming after EU4 with its development and other abstractions. That truly makes this game the spiritual successor to Victoria 2. Of course, EU3 had a primitive pop system, so it's not even unprecedented in this franchise, but from what I can remember and read, it's janky and it's not as all-encompassing a pop system as it became in Victoria 2, which came out 3 years after this game. For example, pops don't have demographics, they don't migrate, they're really just a number tied to a province, and they don't work in buildings. It was taken out and replaced by development for EU4, whereas in Victoria 2 it became the basis for the entire game which everything flows out of. That's what we now have in EU5. Where are the pops stored? Well, let's look at territorial divisions. Thank you to the person who made this very useful thread for comparing the different games. Let me just brush Victoria 3 aside by reminding you that they promised before launch that the pop system would be deeper than ever, but then they simplified it up to pops being based on the state level. In Victoria 2 the pops live in the provinces, 5 of which here make up the state of Brittany. But many systems are at the state level, for example factories, which pull workers together from all 5 provinces. EU5 goes crazy. There's a whole new layer of territorial division, the location, which is the top screen there. Pops live at that level, but also buildings get built at that level. And you'll be pleased to know they don't get built through one country-wide construction queue. You can build simultaneously in every location. As you micromanage your armies, you're moving them from location to location. Locations come together to form a province, which is on the bottom screen. Those provinces are the size equivalent of what you'll see in EU4 and Victoria 2, except there's less interaction with them because they're not the smallest territorial division. Tough question, is it better that they kept provinces as the equivalent size of provinces in other games? Or should they have called the smallest territorial division provinces, instead of locations? Because we're used to the smallest thing you can interact with being called a province. Then the 4 provinces come together to form one state, Brittany. But in the game they don't call it a state, they call it an area. At least with calling an area a state, which I'll probably always do, there's no confusion with something else. As you can see, it gets complicated when you compare it directly to Victoria 2. They're listed next to each other there in terms of interactivity, but I can move them there to compare them in geographic size. Call them what you will, this level of granularity and detail is fantastic. I'm looking forward to it. If I have any concerns, they lean on the side of it being too much. Constructing buildings in every location, managing a big empire, it's a lot. But bring it on! This granularity of pops led to something I was very impressed by early on in EU5 development, the culture and religion map modes. We're getting the greatest level of population detail ever seen in a Paradox game, I'll touch on how that came about later, combined with the greatest amount of locations on the map we've ever had. I think this is a bigger and better repudiation of Victoria 3 than the military system stuff. This is what it's all about. These are map games, these are history games. One of the attractions to them is that you can just look around the world, explore, check the names and cultures of different parts of the world, and in EU5 there's more of that to do than ever. You can just look around and enjoy it. EU5's normal political map mode is one of the best looking they've had for many games, in my opinion. Now the 3D map, mountains, castles and towns on the map, soldiers moving around, that looks great and all. But we can turn that off and have a paper map, thank God, even without mods. There's the feature of Paradox's modern games where you have the political map mode well zoomed out, then you zoom in and get the 3D terrain with the political map fading to the edges. Automatic and no way to turn off without mods. In EU5, we don't have to deal with it anymore, we're free, we can turn it off. Even with the 3D map enabled, you can zoom all the way in and keep the political borders fully as they are. I don't think we've ever been more back. A really nice thing happening with the user interface is that normal pop-ups are back, in earnest. Not the stupid situation button they have in the other modern games. A line of pop-ups going across the top of your screen is the quintessential UI of Paradox games. Even the soundtrack from what I've heard so far is very impressive. It's easy to say that, but honestly a track like Pain is Salvation has no right to go as hard as it does. Unfortunately, Andreas Woldetoft, the legendary composer of loads of past Paradox games, parted ways with them in 2023. But Håkan Glente here has done a fantastic job. If you just take the song names, they could either be for a Europa Universalis game soundtrack or a death metal album, nothing in between. Something making a shocking return is Europa Universalis V sliders. In the form of societal values, which sort of tell you what kind of country you have, each slider giving a trade-off of modifiers. Unlike EU3's ones, they naturally change over time depending on the way you're playing a country, or you can set a member of your government to nudge one in a certain direction. Some countries have unique ones, but overall as a game, EU5 is toning down the uniqueness of countries and exclusive features and modifiers for certain countries compared to EU4, and as a Victoria 2 player I like that. There's a concern that this makes every country the same to play, but the uniqueness of countries in this game will hopefully be felt organically rather than, say, France just having plus 20% manpower because they're France. Comparing the two menus though, you might be thinking the same thing. Modern Paradox UI strikes again, it's really dull, bland, compared to EU3's vibrant colours. Bigger doesn't necessarily mean better here. EU5's one is at least 5 times bigger than EU3's menu, but EU3's is easier to read because you can see them all at the centre of your vision as you look at it. With EU5's you have to look up and down. Or scale the UI down or sit further from your monitor. Work in progress disclaimers of course for anything about the UI, but I'm only working with what I have available to me. Warfare. I'm not going to say that much on this topic, it's something that I really need to find out about by playing the game. Especially in multiplayer, it's completely up in the air how this is going to turn out, how the balance is going to be, but it looks very promising. To bring it back to the pop system first of all, EU5's army manpower being drawn from your population means that it really matters when you use your army and send them to die. As this comic by Father Loris perfectly captures, you're going to care as you do in Victoria 2. Because you're taking peasants off the fields and professional soldiers are hard to replace. EU4's manpower pool you can just use up and refill and use up and refill, and you can increase it with modifiers by increasing other modifiers or developing with mana. France's historically high manpower is just represented with a tradition that gives them plus 20%. In Victoria 2, Russia's historical high manpower is represented by them having a lot of pops. That's how it's going to be in EU5. But other than being based on pops, let's be clear, EU5's military system is nothing like Victoria 2's military system. There isn't just a choice between toy soldiers on the map, or not. There's lots of different types of systems within both of those. We're going to find that EU5's military system is much more like March of the Eagles than Vicky 2. That's the case because we have the left flank, centre, right flank and reserve system. Different units within your army stack can be arranged in those 4 different positions. And then in battle they'll fight accordingly from those positions. You might overrun one flank and then those troops will start attacking the centre. That's an example of something you can just leave to be automatically balanced, or if you want to put in the micromanagement you can carefully choose units to go on different flanks to give you the edge. This goes back to Crusader Kings 2, but the flank thing is quite an underused feature throughout Paradox games. CK3 removed this and simplified the war system a bit. That franchise is about your characters, role-playing, dynasties, so they streamlined the military to focus on that. EU5 seems to be about everything. It's got very fleshed out mechanics in every direction, including war of course. That's something I've always thought about the Europa Universalis franchise. It doesn't have a core identity so much. Crusader Kings is characters and dynasties, Hearts of Iron is war, Victoria is economy, industrialism, colonialism. That doesn't mean get rid of armies, but Europa is just a general grand strategy game in that time period with all sorts of different features, no particular main focus.
And finally there are the auxiliaries, new to EU5. The auxiliaries will represent your army's support structure.
Now I'm not sure what you meant by new to EU5. Were they newly added to EU5 when he said that? How would we know and why would that be relevant? The game's not out yet. Anyway, supply units that you tag along in the reserves of your army are from March of the Eagles. They're not new to Paradox games. Sorry, is this game a joke to you? I take March of the Eagles very seriously. Clearly Johan Andersson does, because just like Imperator Rome, it was one of his pet projects, not too well received at the time, from which he's drawing a lot of stuff to go into EU5. Baggage train units are going to help you supply your army. Supply is going to be a huge thing in EU5 warfare, from what I've seen. From Imperator he's bringing over some army automation and orders. You can manually move your entire army around everywhere if you wish, or you can automate certain things, up to you. That's what I argued for in the Victoria 3 war system video, and that's what we're getting. Obviously I didn't come up with that idea, Imperator Rome is the perfect example of where this is coming from, and they were introduced into Europa Universalis IV. It's just common sense. Well, take or leave what I've said about the game mechanics. I'm going to move on to some broader topics now. Go and check out content creators who have the game early if you want more details. I'll see you on release day live on stream of course. Let's go back for those of you who live in this house. How EU5 came about and my thoughts on their very unique process of announcing this game. We get Crusader Kings 3 in 2020, Victoria 3 at the end of 2022. From there people are speculating what's Paradox's next game. EU5 is a strong contender because it's been so long since a new game in that franchise. But EU4 is so bloated and developed, where could they take it? How can they have a new entry in this franchise without it starting bare bones and then re-releasing the same stuff? Then on February 28th, 2024, out of nowhere, on a whole new section in the Paradox forum, this thread gets posted. Tinto Talks by Johan Andersson, who's the head of Paradox Tinto, a development studio. Tinto was founded in 2020 in Barcelona with Johan at its head, and this is right after or even still during the failure of Imperator Rome. So the joke was that Johan was being placed in exile from his home in Sweden to work in the EU4 DLC mills. And other than secretly working on EU5, EU4 DLC is all that Paradox Tinto has done. That's their whole track record. They got off to a very rough start because the first one they did was Leviathan. Our hero reaches his lowest point in 2021. Usually, Paradox is very structured about how they announce and then release information about an upcoming game. Usually in some kind of big event that's hyped up, they announce what the game is and then begin drip feeding information gradually through dev diaries over the upcoming months. But from the first Tinto Talks dev diary, what we have is the anti-reveal, a complete change from the regular format. They're going to do dev diaries about this game before they officially announce what game it even is. Every dev diary opens with this little upcoming still secret unannounced codename Project Caesar. Even from the first one it's pretty clear that it's EU5, by the second and third it's absolutely confirmed. They hid the name but didn't hold back at all on information and screenshots, which showed a game that actually appeared to be very far along in development already. The open secret of Project Caesar gained so much interest and traction without officially calling itself EU5 just from posting their dev diaries on the forum, which became extremely active. We content creators flocked to discuss it in videos and streams before any marketing money had been put aside. The biggest videos about this unannounced game could get a few 100,000 views. The eventual reveal was just a formality. They're doing normal marketing now. It would be very odd of them not to, but they really don't need it for this game. Did Johan defy the corporate level of Paradox and cross the Rubicon, Project Caesar, by doing this? Marching a legion from his exile in Hispania up to the decaying old Paradox HQ in Stockholm? Or was this all fine and sanctioned? Don't know, but Johan said the reason he did this early reveal was because he wanted feedback, and boy did he get it. Throughout Tinto Talks, as well as its offshoots looking at different aspects, we do have the most transparent development of a game Paradox has ever done, taking in the most feedback, Johan responding to loads of questions and points. I'm not well versed enough to find any really interesting stuff or examples of him changing something based on feedback, but it's all in these hundreds of threads and thousands of replies somewhere. To be honest, I never paid much attention to what was going on in the forum and the constant back and forth of feedback, and I eventually zoned out and lost interest in reading Tinto Talks dev diaries. Once I saw what Johan was really going for with this game, the ambition and the fact it's a spiritual successor to Victoria 2, I thought he doesn't really even need much feedback, at least for the core mechanics of the game and not superficial stuff. Let's just let him pursue the vision he wants to pursue. I didn't have much to add. A contrarian part of me even thought they were taking too much feedback, getting bogged down and making way too many crazy detailed tweaks to cultures and borders. Too many cooks spoil the broth, as they say. The average interaction in the Tinto map section was that the developer would post loads of maps from a given region in the world, including culture and religion. Someone from the region would publish a peer-reviewed ethno-religious study there and then in the thread. They would take that and loads of other feedback on board and post it in a follow-up thread showing all the changes they made. If you're a developer and you want to make the map of a region, what do you do when two people from two different countries are arguing furiously about it on your forum thread? Victoria 2 doesn't have a breathtakingly detailed map and population, but it's a good basis, and people who want to go further and add that detail do so in mods. For example, the Bretons aren't in the base game, but they're in almost every Victoria 2 mod. If this was being developed by Paradox Tinto, there would be a Breton nationalist on the forums, threatening to blow up Paradox HQ if they didn't add them. Concerns have been raised about EU5's performance, so maybe they're going too far. We've been getting assurances that it'll be good by launch. I'm withholding my judgment on that until I play it for myself. And of course, see the Steam reviews pile in from people with different PCs. Minimum requirements Windows 10, recommended Windows 11. Is Microsoft paying them? I'm holding out as long as I can. Having said all that about the endless feedback on cultures and religions, it did give us what I already said earlier, an amazingly detailed world. So to conclude, I'm going to say, if there are no widespread performance issues with this game, then they pulled it off, and my concerns are put to rest. My relationship with the Europa Universalis franchise goes back to EU3. It was my second Paradox game right after Victoria 2. I painted many blobs on the map back in 2012 and even played it in multiplayer a bit. Using Scorched Earth was brutal. Then Europa Universalis IV comes out in 2013, and I've played it quite a bit on and off over the years. Coming back to it every now and again over such a long period of time, you notice how much it's changed, and how much has been added to it. When I really saw what they were going for with this game, it dawned on me that it's a complete and total departure from Europa Universalis IV. I thought, wow, this is fantastic, I love the features they're talking about for EU5, and I don't really like EU4 all that much. And then I thought Victoria 3 was a complete and total departure from Victoria 2, and I made a very big deal about how horrible this departure was. So in turn I thought, won't many EU4 fans feel the same way about EU5's departure? And I'd be celebrating one franchise's departure while complaining about another. Here's my argument as to why the Europa Universalis franchise needs a fresh start rather than building off EU4. There are few better words to describe EU4 than bloated. Every corner of the earth has its own flavoured DLC if you're interested, and it has a ridiculous amount of interconnected mechanics going on. Well, maybe not mechanics, just a bunch of modifiers, that's all the game is. I would say it's been developed to death and there's just nothing more they can do with it. That in turn means that building a sequel off EU4 is impossible. You could look at it like this. Over its 12 years of constant development, Europa Universalis IV has already been several different games in the Europa franchise. There's already been an EU5, 6, 7, maybe even more. Don't ask me exactly where to draw those lines. If you want to play a different game in the EU franchise, look no further than the list of old versions and just pick one. Take EU4 with no mission trees as an open sandbox, for example, versus EU4 as a railroaded game with mission trees. Those are two completely different games. EU4 takes continuous, ongoing development to a ridiculous extreme. On the other extreme of the scam scale, we've got FIFA, which has released at least a game every year that EU4's been a game. And they're all exactly the same. Bet you weren't expecting that comparison. Anyway, as EU4 is an overdeveloped game with no ideas left that's crying out for a fresh start in its sequel,
please kill me.
Victoria 2 was an underdeveloped game that was full of potential, crying out to be either developed more itself or receive a faithful sequel that built on it. EU4 has received over 12 years of constant development, and as far as I can see they're not even stopping when EU5 comes out. Victoria 2 technically received about 5 years of further development after launch, but that's misleading because the final patch, 3.04, came 2.5 years after the last one. I remember when Vic 2's final patch came out, I think I was pleasantly surprised by it because I thought it was already abandoned. 3.04, the same version we've been playing for nearly 10 years. This is a tangent, but I can't stop myself. Look at all the things in here that we take for granted. Right-clicking a country to open diplomacy, windowed borderless. Many of you won't appreciate this, but this transport bug was the absolute bane of multiplayer before 2015. You could barely do naval invasions because you couldn't load troops onto transports. Between the releases of Victoria 2 and EU4, Paradox grew as a company, changed and stepped up their approach to continuous development after launch. Unfortunately, Vic 2 was left behind. Even Crusader Kings 2, which was released in 2012, got way more attention after launch, way more expansions and stuff. The continued development came with a price, as you well know from Paradox's DLC policy. It's a double-edged sword, but the point is Victoria 2 was abandoned, underdeveloped, brimming with potential. This is the genius of what they're doing with EU5. It's diverging away from something that doesn't need a spiritual successor to be the spiritual successor to something that does need one. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why Victoria 3 is not a welcome successor to Victoria 2, and EU5 is a welcome successor to EU4. If you're a big fan of EU4 and you don't like the direction they're taking EU5, first of all I'd like to hear your perspective in the comments. Second of all, you will still have EU4. When Victoria 3 fans said that to us, it was a very dismissive comment, but in this case I think it fairly applies because EU4 is so fleshed out and is the complete fulfilment of that vision. And I don't even think they're fully abandoning it after the launch of EU5 anyway. 4 and 5 will be such different games that 5 is not a replacement for 4 at all. How does EU5 fit into the context of Paradox Interactive as a company overall? Over the past few years, Paradox has given us what I like to call the Age of Slop, and I'm not even talking about Victoria 3, let's put that to one side. Paradox has had an insane run of flops, failures and cancellations through 2023 and 2024. Plenty have made videos and talked about these things individually, but after being on the front lines with PieChucker reacting to and discussing all these different games for our sins, we put all this into perspective and context and named it the Age of Slop. Paradox really trying to grow and become the next big games publisher. So let's go through it because it's a fascinating run, and bear in mind, at the end of it all, we're getting Europa Universalis V, which I believe is a return to form, making what they're known for and gained them popularity and success in the first place, good old-fashioned grand strategy games. The most notable disaster was Cities Skylines 2. Just like the first game, it was developed by Colossal Order, but as the publishers, Paradox seemed to push it out way too soon, it was unfinished and broken on launch. The game got mixed reviews, and its first DLC, which felt like a slap in the face, became the worst reviewed item on Steam ever. They made a big apology and refunded that DLC, making it part of the base game, so its accolade of worst reviewed thing ever was conveniently no longer visible. Further DLC has been delayed, as if that'll save the game anyway, and the promised console port is just gone. It only took a couple of months before the player count dropped below the first Cities Skylines game, and that about sums it up, because why play it over the predecessor? Personally, I've always liked Cities Skylines 1 and I was looking forward to the sequel as it was being announced. I was even optimistic because it wasn't Paradox developing it. Ultimately I didn't buy it because I could see what was happening and I saw no reasons to play it over the first one. The Cities Skylines franchise is the biggest franchise associated with Paradox. It's their most mainstream game. By 2022 it had sold 12 million copies. As for Paradox's biggest developed games, I can see an estimate of 6 million copies for Hearts of Iron 4 and 4 million copies for CK3. They fumbled by far their biggest franchise. Other published failures include Prison Architect 2. They picked up the first game after it launched, turned it into a DLC fest, then planned a follow-up game. In 2024 they announced the sequel, then it was in development hell with a change of studios, multiple delays, and then indefinite delay. Pre-orders refunded. Still absolutely no news on it to this day. It's far down the circles of development hell. That could have been another big one because Prison Architect 1 had sold 4 million copies by 2019. They fumbled another one of their biggest franchises. But at least we can watch some tutorials for a non-existent game. Paradox sponsored some of Prison Architect's biggest content creators to make some. Paradox attempted to compete with the Civilization franchise by publishing a game developed by a very small team called Millennia. Never mind 4, 5, 6 or 7, Millennia doesn't quite compete with Civilization 3 in player count in the Big 25. I didn't even find the game to be that bad, but it does meet the definition of slop, I'm afraid. In fact, it's where we coined the term Age of Slop because the game's about going through these big ages. Paradox's deputy CEO plays down the failure and loss that was Millennia, saying it's fine because it didn't cost too much anyway. Just looking at the game I don't doubt that for a second, but surely there's some kind of moral or reputational cost. Paradox really tried to build up this game and they threw so much marketing into it. They used all of Paradox's existing developed franchises to point towards the reveal of Millennia. This had the effect of making many people speculate and hope that this was a full Paradox release, maybe even EU5. This was before Tinto Talks. Misleading to say at the least. The reveal trailer ends up getting just shy of 400,000 views. Then Paradox does a load of sponsorships for Millennia. They got a lot of views which did not translate into players of the game. 1 million people watched Spiffing Brit break the game, which can't have been too difficult. Even the good old Yogscast got a sponsorship in here. But you know, it was just a nice little throwaway game, didn't really matter, didn't cost them anything. This news actually broke while I was making the video. Millennia has now been abandoned, it's over. They met the DLC quota that they were planning before release. Even though, and I quote, it didn't cost us the bank, from the marketing there's a lot of awareness of the game if nothing else, and there's an opening in the market after the flop of Civ 7, the game couldn't even reach a millennium in days before getting dumped unceremoniously. The marketing and reveal that they put into Millennia just makes such a big contrast with the anti-reveal and initially non-existent marketing for EU5. On the 17th of June 2024, they cancelled an upcoming title, Life by You, which was to be a clone or competitor of The Sims. Not only that, but the entire studio, a Paradox studio, Paradox Tectonic, was shut down. This is not just a published thing, Paradox had a studio of their own working on this since 2019. 24 people working for 5 years just to be fired at the end of it with nothing to show for it. One of the developers who got laid off called it a shit show. They say they were about ready for early access, but after Cities Skylines 2 Paradox started ruthlessly bringing the axe down. Another Paradox relationship that did not end amicably was with the developers of this flop called Lamplighters League. Paradox branded the game a failure only a week after it came out. Then they parted ways with the studio, which they owned. Paradox kept custody of the kids in this divorce, even the games the studio made before Paradox even owned them, so kids from previous marriages. They also laid off loads of staff just before the game came out. Do you think it ends there? No, there's even more. Paradox in this era really is a King Midas, but everything they touch turns to slop. Paradox published a glorified Stellaris mod as a standalone game for a full price. I mean, just look at it, it's Stellaris. You can see enough on that one screenshot. They also released some DLCs for various games during this time which didn't get received well, adding to the slop. When 2025 rolled around, thankfully they slowed down. They haven't released or published any new games this year, just DLC. We just have the upcoming EU5 and Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2. I really don't know anything about that, but I've heard there have also been controversies there, and it's been delayed. Oh Jesus, it was announced in 2019? We all have our own subjective opinion about how all this affects Paradox's reputation, but here are the facts about how it affected their revenue. Nothing disastrous, it looks like they're just falling back down to where they were before the Age of Slop. They've apologised a lot, and particularly after appointing this deputy CEO, talked about returning to basics, that sort of thing. And luckily they've got Johan to do that for them with Europa Universalis V. He's ending the Age of Slop and bringing us a good old-fashioned grand strategy game. Or at least we hope so. Do Paradox really deserve him at this point? The interesting thing here is that EU5 is going to be the only Paradox mainline grand strategy release not developed by what they call Paradox Development Studio, which although they might have different teams, are all the ones based in Stockholm. This highlights the seeming independence that Tinto and Johan have over in Barcelona. They're almost like a different company in how they did the reveal of the game, and how the game itself is so different from Paradox's recent practices. Given Paradox's Age of Slop and their huge failures, to go back to the days most notoriously in EU4, where DLC was their biggest controversy, would be a return to form for Paradox. So is DLC going to be a controversy with Europa Universalis V? Before launch they've already announced 4 upcoming DLCs, which has raised a few eyebrows. When it comes to DLC, Paradox will say, if you want future development, patches, fixes, more content to be added to the game later, it has to be funded through DLC. Is that a basic premise that we can accept? Well, I think begrudgingly most of us do. People keep turning out to buy Paradox's DLCs. They've gone some way towards addressing this by improving the DLC model in more recent years. When they drop an expansion, they also drop a load of free content related to it in the game at the same time. This is CK3's Tours and Tournaments, which I'm playing in the background footage. Outdated probably, I know. But you just can't deny how good this is with the amount of free stuff they added, in the free patch coinciding with the expansion. Europa Universalis IV was egregious for having mechanics locked behind every DLC, which were essential to play the current, up-to-date game. Nowadays, even in Victoria 3, new mechanics tend to go into the free patches, whereas flavour content tends to go into the DLC. Combine this with the very nice thing they do in multiplayer, where if the host has all the DLC, anyone can join and use it. Under those two systems, I've enjoyed loads of the new content that they've released for Crusader Kings 3, for example, without spending a penny on it after launch. But in trying to deal with those DLC complaints and adding more free content, they created problems in the other direction in what I like to call the Paradox paradox. If there's less content and mechanics in the actual DLC that gets put in the free patch, and the DLCs are just cosmetic, flavour, then people complain that the DLCs have nothing and there's no point buying them, and people feel scammed by the special editions which guarantee a set amount of DLC if you buy it. That leads to big negative reviews happening on the DLCs, and people angry that it wasn't worth the money they spent. The worst thing that Paradox is guilty of is when they release a bare bones game on launch which is clearly designed to have DLC fill the gaps later. Victoria 3 among other things was guilty of that. At least probably aided by all the backlash, they updated the game, improved and added mechanics in 3 patches. If you enjoy that, you can thank me later. When a company releases a game in an ideal world, it should be fully fledged and able to stand on its own 2 feet from launch. Anything added afterwards is a cherry on top, an added bonus. Paradox have leaned way too far into the fix-it post-launch, make the players basically test the game sort of mentality. Already announcing DLC before the game is even out suggests that, from EU5. What exactly is the DLC in question here? Sacred Sites is some 3D models of holy sites on the map. I'm going to get that and turn the 3D map off. Then we've got an immersion pack and 2 chronicle packs. Well, an immersion pack seems to me like cosmetic stuff, like a UI change to make it look more Byzantine, and chronicle packs sound like flavour, event chains. And they're announced for quarters well in the future, so they could well be planned things rather than things they have ready now but are withholding. Furthermore, the DLCs are announced in the context of the premium edition with which you'll save money on them. So this is actually making people aware that if you get the premium edition, the DLCs you're getting are these flavour packs, not mechanic packs or expansions. Less excuse to be disappointed later. It doesn't seem to be the bad old days of mechanical DLCs like EU4, so be sceptical and ready to complain if anything ever comes out that looks terrible. Have your pitchfork nearby just in case. But this doesn't look egregious to me if you accept the premise that they need DLC in order to fund the future of the game. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I never thought I'd see the day, but an entire dev diary about multiplayer. Usually it seems to be an afterthought for Paradox, but this time, Johan is recognising the importance of it. There are a couple of interesting multiplayer features in this dev diary that I'll go over, then an interesting deep dive on a feature they're finally bringing back after not putting it in their last 3 releases. We have in-game resynchronization instead of having to rehost, and we have hot joining. That's nothing new, but it's a game changer if you're making the leap from Victoria 2 to EU5. This change in architecture here isn't going to be that much of a difference. It should just lighten the load on the multiplayer host, and maybe make big lobbies more possible. A couple of very nice new options here. The host can set how much lag he'll tolerate before the game pauses and tells you that some player is lagging behind. And next, these pausing options are really good, and it shows that Johan and the EU5 team actually care about some of the complexities of multiplayer. The host can choose who's allowed to pause the game, including the specific option of allowing any player to pause the game, but only the host being able to unpause the game. Which means that any player can pause the game to make a rule break allegation, then only the host decides when the game can continue after he's solved it. You know, in Victoria 2, if you've been accused of a multi-province retreat and the enemy pauses, after 30 seconds you can unpause yourself, which might get rid of the evidence. On the other hand, if players are abusing the pause button to micromanage or spamming it, the host can just turn it off and not let anyone pause. By the way, in Victoria 3 there are still no pausing options, anyone can pause the game at any time. The big crucial thing that Europa Universalis V multiplayer is bringing back, which no major Paradox release for 5 years has had. My god, they've actually done it. And it will of course be complete with being able to message people privately or the whole lobby. Now, the fact that they've managed to add an in-game chat to EU5's multiplayer really raises the question, why weren't they able to do this for Crusader Kings 3, Victoria 3 and Imperator Rome?
Why is it, when something happens, it is always you three?
The answer leads us on a very interesting tangent. The multiplayer of those 3 aforementioned games uses a back-end system called Nakama, whereas before that they used Steam with EU4 and HOI4. In those older games you join multiplayer under your Steam account, under the newer Nakama games you join under your Paradox account. Apparently for cost and accessibility reasons, when you combine Paradox games with Nakama you just can't do some of the most basic functions of the internet we've been doing for decades. EU5 however is not using Nakama, it's going back to Steam's multiplayer backend. Just like that run of 3 games from 2013 to 2016 which are Paradox's most successful really, you'll be playing multiplayer through your Steam account. The reason they brought in the Nakama system was supposedly crossplay, so that players who got the game on different platforms can play together like the Epic Game Store, GOG, not mentioned here but also the Xbox Game Pass, as well as Steam. Crusader Kings 3 is on console but the crossplay does not extend that far. EU5 is only being distributed on Steam at least initially, so there wouldn't be any need for crossplay anyway. I don't know if that decision comes from wanting to get the in-game chat back or corporate reasons. Paradox first brought in Nakama in August 2020, about a year after Imperator Rome came out, so as you can see the company behind Nakama advertised it along with that. Because apparently there were loads of Imperator Rome players who bought the game on the Epic Game Store or GOG who were crying out to play multiplayer with their friends who got it on Steam but just couldn't. Crusader Kings 3 and Victoria 3 both continued to use it. I've played all 3 of those games in multiplayer and there isn't any noticeable difference from their Steam based games in stability and going out of sync. That's inherent in all Paradox games. So bringing in a whole new system didn't exactly improve anything, crossplay is really the only thing. But Nakama seems to come with this bizarre phenomenon where it just doesn't seem to support an in-game text chat. Otherwise I wouldn't have a problem with it. I heavily criticised Victoria 3 at the time for not having one, because I wanted it to have good functioning multiplayer that I could enjoy and play and make content out of. And people actually defended it. Yes, most people will be using a third party like Discord to communicate, but public lobbies are killed, and even while using Discord it's very nice to have a convenient in-game way of talking to people and making announcements. I tab out to write messages to people on Discord sometimes, but I also write in-game messages while keeping an eye on what's happening in the game.
Do you guys not have phones?
Yeah, you guys all have phones, right?
Something very interesting as we go even further down the Nakama rabbit hole was that it was retroactively added as an option to Europa Universalis IV. Boot up the game now and you'll see this. You have Steam multiplayer, but if you want to play EU4 with people on other platforms, EU4 is actually on the Epic Games Store, you select Nakama. This raises the concern that if they want to sell EU5 on a different platform in the future, maybe they're going to add this. All sources indicate that Nakama crossplay multiplayer in EU4 is utterly broken, but I'm pretty sure the in-game chat is still there in EU4's Nakama, so maybe that's what breaks it. Does being able to play multiplayer across different platforms actually benefit anyone? I have no idea. If it helps you, well, good for you. I played a huge CK3 multiplayer game with 80 plus players. How many of them are you willing to bet were not using Steam? I for one would have much rather had an in-game chat. Maybe this isn't a typical multiplayer experience, but I'm scrolling through the players and I have to tab out and look on Discord through different channels to find out who's who and then message them. In the examples they gave of different platforms for crossplay, they mentioned the Paradox store, even though that only sells Steam keys. I think, and remember how they were trying to branch out as a big publisher. They were aiming to have their own store, launcher, and multiplayer done through Paradox accounts. They were trying to make it all in-house, go the way of EA with Origin, or at least as a first step, just decouple themselves from being too reliant on Steam. One of the problems some people had with City Skylines 2 was that they took modding out of the Steam workshop and did their own thing, Paradox mods. It's funny that one of the reasons they did this was to get modding on console, and the console port has been indefinitely delayed. Dinostan's comment about the 2 players on the Epic Game Store could be applied to crossplay multiplayer as well. In the end, Paradox's attempt to become the next big games corporation, publisher, platform fell flat on its face. In order to save some kind of goodwill as a company, they have to return to things that worked before, making a good old-fashioned grand strategy game with multiplayer that works through your Steam account. I don't think this guy was even aware that Paradox was trying to be competition. So overall, just like the game as a whole, I'm looking forward to EU5 multiplayer and I'm so glad that they're paying attention to it and adding some nice things. They clearly care about multiplayer functionality, but EU5 MP will only be as good as EU5 is itself, of course. One of the reasons Victoria 2 multiplayer and any other Paradox game is good is because it eliminates the need to interact with the AI. Paradox has always had problems making good AI, so replace them with humans and you'll have a better experience. I don't know how the AI is shaping up in EU5 with our early access, so we're really going to wait and see with that one on launch. It could have the best mechanics ever made, but if the AI can't handle them, it's almost pointless. A problem related to that, and one of the reasons I don't like EU4 multiplayer so much, is that a huge portion of your experience in MP will still be dealing with the AI because of the time period and sheer amount of countries there are. In the early game you have to carve your way through a lot of AI to reach the players. Generally speaking, I don't mean England and France obviously. Playing in the HRE in EU5 single player or multiplayer is going to be like some sci-fi planet where there are 10,000 robots for every person. Therefore, and this is something you keep asking me about non-stop, a Victorian era mod for EU5 will be the perfect thing. Because if you get a full lobby, almost every country in Europe will be occupied by a player, not AI. EU5 taking Victoria mechanics really makes it the perfect fit, so if there isn't a mod in development already, a Victoria mod for EU5 should be one of the first to drop. It's confirmed that modders already have their hands on EU5. In a similar program to the Victoria 3 early modding program, where modders got access to the game early so that they could release mods along with the game's launch. And then, in the case of Victoria 3, most of them abandoned the game not too long after. What we don't know is whether or not one of the mods already being developed for EU5 is a Victorian era one. I'll keep my eyes peeled. For an old grog nerd like me still playing Victoria 2 in the Big 25, playing multiplayer in a Paradox game which is actually being developed and not one that was abandoned 10 years ago is going to be tough to adapt to, let me tell you. We'll have to deal with updates, DLC, and the game maybe not being recognisable to what it was a year ago. Mods have to keep up, content will go out of date as the game changes. And I've got a long backlog of Vic 2 multiplayer content that will always stand the test of time because the game's the same, we're not going back several versions. Although our jokes and references to current events might get stale. We're permanently on version 3.04 forever, and I wouldn't have it any other way. But this is just something I have to accept and get used to, it is what it is. They're bringing out a game in 2025 that's a spiritual successor to a game that came out in 2010. In the intro I mentioned how people were watching as Victoria 2 did not get a spiritual successor. I was of course also implicitly referring to Gilded Destiny and Open Vic there. Lately Gilded Destiny, which is now being published by Hooded Horse, made an immense hiring. Chris King, seen here alongside Johan in the Victoria 2 credits, is now the lead designer. So all this EU5 stuff is going crazy, but don't forget about this successor to Victoria 2 as well. And this is an actual commercial competitor to Paradox. The Open Vic project, which is not a competitor to Paradox, is still going. It's slow, of course. Obviously things aren't going to be the same as the honeymoon period of the first year or so. The people volunteering their time to make it have lives and jobs, but just check the GitHub and you'll see that things are happening. I for one don't understand the technicalities of what's going on, so it's hard for me to update you. I've just been letting them get on with it. I'm convinced we'll see Open Vic and Gilded Destiny in the not too distant future. EU5 coming along and going in the direction it is really was a surprise and an added bonus on top of the things we already have. Well, thank you very much for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video. I managed to find some things to yap about for about 46 minutes despite not having early access to EU5. I'm locked out of that, but I really have to make a video and capitalise on this upcoming game somehow. Special thanks to Zorange and Kuchulin, who are very up to date on their EU5 stuff, for keeping me right and helping me find relevant things. Anyway, check out some of my Victoria 2 multiplayer content and March of the Eagles multiplayer content. I'll be streaming EU5 on release day, and hopefully well beyond that. I multi-stream on YouTube and Twitch these days. Support me on Patreon to keep the channel going, join the channel membership, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord to continue the conversation. Bye everyone.